Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the mist-cloaked valleys of eastern Bosnia, where the mountains rise like sentinels and winters bite harder than most city dwellers can imagine. The air is sharp enough to sting your lungs, and the sound of boots crunching on frozen soil is the only rhythm in the streets. Here in Srebrenica, a boy named Naser grows up watching shadows stretch long over stone houses, each carrying stories older than the cracked walls themselves. He's restless, though, too aware that the world beyond these hills might be louder, faster, and maybe even more dangerous. You probably won't survive this one if you're expecting a quiet stroll, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories drift to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Naser's earliest days are a mix of worn-down school desks, wood smoke curling from chimneys, and a mother who could make bread stretch through weeks when the shop shelves were bare. Winters were not just cold, they were tests of will. Ice crept into the corners of every home, and boys learned quickly that you kept moving to keep warm. For Naser, moving meant exploring. He'd wander past the old Ottoman bridge, its stones slick with frost, imagining where the river might take him if he followed it long enough. The market in the town square was the heart of everything. Farmers arrived at dawn, their breath steaming in the chill, selling apples with skin like polished leather and jars of honey, thick as amber. It was here that Naser first learned to watch people closely, the way a man's eyes shifted when he lied about a price, or how two traders might exchange a nod that meant a deal was already done before the words were spoken. His father, a man of quiet discipline, often warned him about chasing quick gains. But even as a boy, Naser could sense that rules in the mountains bent easily if you knew where to press. A neighbor once caught him slipping through the back of a storage shed, pocketing a handful of dried plums without asking. The neighbor laughed, let him go, and told him, "If you're going to take something, at least be clever about it." That remark stayed with him longer than any school lesson. Life in Srebrenica in the late 1970s wasn't untouched by the wider Yugoslav world. The occasional soldier in olive drab would pass through, and stories from Sarajevo or Belgrade traveled faster than the mail. Young men returning from the cities brought back music tapes, new slang, and a whiff of swagger that made the local boys restless. Naser listened, absorbed, and imagined himself one day walking streets where no one knew his name. Yet the mountains had a way of holding you. The paths were narrow, the forests deep, and in those woods lay both protection and danger. He learned to track deer not for sport, but because knowing where the animals moved meant knowing where the people moved too. In a land where every bend in the trail could hide a friend or a stranger, such knowledge was quietly valuable. On the edge of town, an older cousin ran a small garage, fixing battered ladas for miners and truckers. Naser spent hours there, not because he loved engines, but because he loved the talk. Men came in smelling of diesel and cigarettes, their conversations slipping easily between football scores and whispers about cross-border deals. He didn't fully understand the stakes, but he caught the rhythm of how influence flowed, through favors, through debts, through promises that no one wrote down. One winter, a traveling merchant set up in the square with goods from across the Drina. Naser helped carry crates, and in return, The merchant gave him a small folding knife with a bone handle. "Not for fighting," the man said, "for cutting ropes when you need to move fast." Years later, that knife would ride in Naser's pocket during nights far darker than this boyhood memory. The seeds of ambition were already taking root. He wasn't thinking yet of war or power or command, but he understood that those who controlled the flow of goods, be it apples in the market or fuel in the hills, were the ones who shaped how the rest lived. And as snow fell over Srebrenica, muffling the sound of distant trucks, he found himself dreaming less about the stars overhead and more about the roads they lit below. Sarajevo, in the early 1980s, hums with a rhythm Srebrenica could never muster. The streets are wide, the air thick with the scent of coffee roasting in little brass pots, and the tram lines hum under the weight of a city always in motion. For Naser, arriving here as a young police recruit feels like stepping into another world. His crisp uniform is still stiff at the seams, the badge on his chest catching more light than he's comfortable with. But he walks with a straight back, partly out of pride, partly because in Sarajevo, eyes are always on you. Training is straightforward. Patrol patterns, radio codes, the basics of crowd control. What's not in the manual is how to read the city. That part he learns on the job. In the Baskarcia district, the old Ottoman quarter, shopkeepers greet him warmly enough, but keep their conversations just short of revealing anything useful. In the newer neighborhoods, teenagers lean against concrete walls, eyeing his uniform with a mix of curiosity and defiance. The first months are about learning where trouble likes to hide. It's often not in the alleys you expect, but in the bright cafes where businessmen linger over too many cigarettes, or in the quiet back rooms of repair shops that never seem to close. A fellow officer tells him, "The city talks in three voices, the one it uses in daylight, the one it uses at night, and the one it never says out loud." Naser takes this to heart. He finds himself drawn to the nightlife, not for the drinking, but for the information. Clubs in Sarajevo are more than places for music. They are marketplaces of whispers. A stolen car in Zenica, a shipment of untaxed liquor crossing the border, a football match where the outcome is decided before the first whistle. None of this directly falls into his job description, but the city doesn't care about job descriptions. One late evening, patrolling near the Miljacka River, he spots a man hurriedly tucking something into his jacket before ducking into a stairwell. Regulations say he should give chase, but his instincts tell him to watch instead. Moments later, a second man arrives, carrying a canvas bag. They exchange a quick nod, the bag disappears into the stairwell, and both men part ways without a word. The whole thing lasts under 30 seconds, but it stays in Naser's mind far longer. These glimpses into the undercurrent begin to shape his thinking. He sees that the line between the law and those who bend it is not a wall, it's a curtain, and if you stand close enough, you can look through. This doesn't mean he's breaking rules yet, but he's learning who bends them and how. Not all his days are spent in shadows. There are routine patrols along Wilson's Promenade, where families stroll on Sundays and children feed crumbs to pigeons. He enjoys those shifts, the ease of them, but he also knows they teach him little about the real Sarajevo. That education comes from the calls that pull him into cramped apartments, smelling of fried onions and old smoke, where disputes over rent or stolen radios escalate fast. One afternoon, he's assigned to help secure a visiting political delegation. The guests arrive in polished cars, flanked by men in tailored coats. Naser notices one man in particular, not part of the official entourage, but clearly in control. He doesn't wear a badge, yet even the ministers glance his way before making decisions. Later, an older officer leans over and murmurs, "That's a man you'll want to remember. He moves things in this city that no truck can carry." The remark lodges in his mind. Moving things. Not just goods, but influence, permission, access. Naser begins to realize that power in Sarajevo is as much about knowing the right people as it is about wearing the right uniform. By the end of his first year, he's not just patrolling the streets, he's mapping them in his head, noting which cafes grow quiet when certain men walk in, which warehouses never seem to unload during the day, and which back doors stay unlocked longer than they should. There's no single moment when he decides that the uniform is more than a job. But on a damp autumn night, watching raindrops gather on his cap, while a man in a leather jacket hands off an envelope thicker than any he's ever seen, he feels it. The city has other rules, and he's learning them one by one. It starts subtly, those first brushes with the underworld. Naser isn't looking for trouble, but in Sarajevo, certain doors open if you know where to stand. The cafes where he spends off-duty hours are not the ones in guidebooks. They're the smoky corners where the jukebox plays the same song 3 times in a row, and men linger over tiny cups of coffee long after they're empty. At first, it's just conversation. A man with slicked back hair asks about police patrol schedules, not directly, just in a way that makes Naser realize he's not after small talk. Another mentions the difficulty of moving spare car parts across district lines, wondering aloud how someone with your knowledge of the streets might avoid checkpoints. These are not offers. Not yet. They're feelers. One evening, in a basement billiard hall near Marajin Dvor, Naser meets a man who calls himself Zlaja. No last name. He plays pool with casual precision, never taking his eyes off Naser as he lines up shots. Zlaja is known among the younger officers for running certain errands between Sarajevo and Tuzla. Errands that somehow involve both cash and police paperwork disappearing at the same time. He asks Naser where he's from, and when Naser says Srebrenica, Zlaja grins. "Good," he says. Mountain boys don't scare easy. Through Zlaja, the introductions widen. There's Emir, who runs a garage, but somehow has more foreign cigarettes in his storeroom than any shop in town. There's Salko, who dresses like a traveling salesman, but speaks in half sentences about deliveries and clients without ever naming the goods. These men aren't the gun-toting gangsters of cinema. They're businessmen with rough edges, fluent in the language of favors. Naser's first favor is small enough to feel harmless. A friend of Zelaya's has a cousin whose car needs to be moved from one side of the city to the other without attracting attention. It's nothing serious, they say. Just paperwork trouble. Naser drives it on his day off. No uniform, no siren. It feels almost like helping a neighbor until he notices the trunk is padlocked from the outside. That night, over a plate of grilled cevapi in a side street tavern, Zlaja thanks him and slides a folded bill across the table. It's more than half his monthly salary. Naser hesitates for a moment before pocketing it. For the trouble, Zlaja says, and because you didn't ask what was in the trunk. The work doesn't pull him away from the force, at least not yet. In fact, the uniform makes him more useful. He learns that certain traffic stops can be waved through with a friendly nod. Certain names dropped into conversation can untangle paperwork, and certain calls can be made to buy an extra half hour before a raid. What surprises him most is how normal it feels. There's no dramatic moment of crossing over. It's simply a matter of adjusting the balance, official duties on one hand, quiet arrangements on the other. The city's undercurrent is not an enemy to him now. It's a parallel stream he can dip into when it suits. He begins to dress differently off-duty. Better shoes, sharper jackets. Nothing flashy enough to draw suspicion at the precinct, but enough for the right people to notice. At one cafe, a man slides into the booth beside him and says, "I hear you can make problems disappear." Naser doesn't confirm or deny it. He just sips his coffee and lets the man talk. Still, he's careful. Sarajevo is full of officers who got too greedy, too visible, too quickly. They end up transferred to some distant border post or worse, alone in a room where the questions keep coming until the answers run out. Naser's approach is patience. Small jobs, quiet money, no unnecessary risks. But in the back of his mind, he knows this balance can't last forever. The underworld isn't a place you can just visit. Sooner or later, it expects you to live there. And as autumn fog rolls into the city, blurring the lines between streetlights and shadows, Naser begins to feel that invitation drawing closer. By the late 1980s, the air in Sarajevo feels heavier. It's not just the damp settling over the city before winter. It's the tension, the whispered sense that something far bigger is shifting beyond the horizon. News reports speak carefully about political disagreements and regional concerns. But on the streets, the words are blunter. People talk about division, about the old Yugoslavia showing cracks no one can plaster over. Naser notices it first in the police work. Calls to certain neighborhoods become more frequent, fueled by arguments that spiral into fights over flags, songs, or even the language used on street signs. There's more suspicion in the air, more sidelong glances between people who once stood together at football matches. And in the cafes where he spends his off hours, talk has turned to preparing for the worst. The underworld senses change faster than the government. The men Naser has been dealing with start stockpiling, not just goods to sell, but fuel, medicine, and quietly, weapons. A truckload of sugar one week, a crate of rifles the next. "Just in case," Zlaya tells him one evening, tapping ash into a chipped glass. When things break, people pay for what they can't find anywhere else. It's not just local players. Strange faces start appearing in Sarajevo's quieter bars. Men with accents from across the republics, each carrying themselves like they're scouting for something. Some are discreet. Others make no effort to hide the fact they're here to connect with the right kind of people. Naser's role shifts without anyone saying it out loud. The jobs become more pointed, moving equipment at night, arranging safe storage in basements no one visits, delivering messages that can't risk the post. He's still a policeman, but that badge now opens doors for a different kind of authority. The first real sign of what's coming arrives in the form of a convoy, 2 vans and an old bus, arriving from a rural area near Zvornik. Naser is told to help escort it into the city without interference. Inside are men who are lean, hard-eyed, and silent, carrying bundles wrapped in tarpaulin. Even without opening them, Naser knows what's inside. The weapons aren't new, but they're clean, oiled, ready. He's careful not to ask where they're from. In Sarajevo now, the less you ask, the more you stay standing. But as the vans disappear into a warehouse compound, he feels the ground under the city shifting. In the days that follow, political speeches grow sharper, more divided. The faces on the evening news wear smiles that don't reach their eyes. At the precinct, even casual conversations between officers carry an edge. old friendships fraying along invisible lines. One rainy night, Naser finds himself in a quiet restaurant on the outskirts, sitting across from a man he's never met before. The man speaks slowly, choosing each word as if it might be weighed later. "There will be sides," he says. "Better to choose yours before someone chooses it for you." It's not a threat, not exactly. More like a statement of the new rules forming in the dark. On his way home, Naser walks along the Miljaka, watching the river swell with rain. He thinks of Srebrenica, of the quiet hills and the market square, of how far he's traveled from that boyhood, and how close he might be to returning. War hasn't begun yet, but it's no longer an if, it's a when. And in that moment, he realizes something else. Whatever side he ends up on, the skills he's been honing, reading people, moving quietly, making things happen without leaving a trace, are about to become more valuable than ever. The road back to Srebrenica is winding, a ribbon of cracked asphalt twisting through valleys that feel older than memory. It's early spring, but the air still carries winter's bite. Naser drives in silence, the hum of the engine blending with the distant rush of the Drina River. Sarajevo's noise and neon fade in the rear view, replaced by bare trees, scattered farms, and the smell of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. Word of his return reaches town before he does. In small places, it always does. When he pulls into the square, a few heads turn, not with surprise, but with the quiet calculation of people who want to know why a man like him has come back. Some greet him warmly, old neighbors, former classmates, but their smiles carry questions. Others nod stiffly, uncertain of what his presence might mean. Srebrenica feels different now. The talk in the market is more guarded, the laughter shorter, the silences heavier. Rumors of trouble in other towns have seeped into daily conversation, and people here have started making their own plans. Some stockpile flour and salt, others clean the dust off old hunting rifles. The sense of something looming is everywhere. Naser settles into a modest house on the edge of town, close enough to see the hills, but far enough from the main road to avoid too much notice. He visits the garage run by his cousin, the same one where he'd listened to men talk in half-truths years ago. The talk is sharper now, less about football scores, more about which routes are still safe and who's disappeared without explanation. His return is not purely nostalgic. Sarajevo was growing too volatile, and the underworld there was already aligning with political agendas he didn't fully trust. Back here, he sees an opportunity. In a small town, control is about relationships as much as force. He still has both. It starts with reconnecting to the hunters, the drivers, the traders. He shares coffee with a man who knows every footpath through the surrounding hills. He spends an evening with a trucker who's been quietly hauling supplies to villages that aren't on the map anymore. No questions, just an exchange of information wrapped in the comfort of old familiarity. The police station in Srebrenica is smaller than the Sarajevo precincts, but its officers are just as wary of the changing times. Some remember Naser from before, others only know the stories about him in the city. He's polite but distant, careful not to align too quickly. In tense places, people remember who stood too close to whom. Still, his presence alone starts to shift the local balance. Traders approach him with offers. A man whose son is facing charges asks for help smoothing things out. Another wants protection for a delivery coming in from across the border. Naser doesn't take every deal. Selectivity builds both trust and mystique. One late afternoon, while walking home, he pauses on a hill overlooking the town. The rooftops glint in the fading light, smoke curling from chimneys, the narrow streets winding like veins through the valley. It's the same Srebrenica he left, and yet not the same at all. The world beyond these hills is moving toward something dangerous, and when it reaches here, the people will need someone who can navigate both the visible and the hidden. He's not thinking yet in terms of armies or warlords, but he knows how influence works in uncertain times. It's built slowly, like stacking firewood before winter, and Naser has just started gathering his pile. The first rifle comes to him wrapped in an old wool blanket, handed over in the back room of a friend's farmhouse. It's a battered Zastava, the kind once issued to militia units, its stock worn smooth from years of use. Naser sets it on the table, running his fingers along the cool metal. This isn't just a weapon, it's a line crossed. He doesn't go looking for more, but in times like these, they find him. A neighbor mentions a stash of hunting rifles hidden in an attic since the last political upheaval. Another man offers to trade a crate of ammunition for a few sacks of flour. The trades happen quietly. No receipts, no witnesses, just nods and handshakes in dim light. It's not a sudden transformation from policeman to fighter. It's more like a slow exchange of uniforms. One day you're carrying a sidearm on your belt for duty. The next, you're storing rifles in cellars and keeping a mental ledger of who owes you what. And in Srebrenica, everyone owes something to someone. The shift is as much about people as it is about arms. Men who once spoke in polite greetings now lower their voices when Naser walks by, not out of fear, but respect. He starts gathering a circle. Drivers who know back roads like the lines on their hands, farmers with cellars big enough for crates, and a handful of younger men eager to prove themselves. His cousin, the garage owner, becomes a quiet hub. Trucks pull in for repairs and leave with weight they didn't have before. Spare parts are swapped, license plates switched. Sometimes, Naser himself rides along, checking the routes that weave through the forested hills toward Bratunac or across the Drina into Serbia. One night, in a half-lit room above a cafe, Naser sits with 3 men and a map spread across the table. The lines they trace are not the ones on any official chart. These are paths hidden from casual eyes, logging roads, goat trails, dried stream beds that can carry more than water. A man taps one route with his finger and says, "No checkpoints for now, but when they come, you'll want someone watching both ends." It's not all about movement of goods. There are warnings, too. Quiet words about strangers seen near the bridges, about men asking too many questions in the market. Naser listens, weighs each piece of news, and decides what to act on. The discipline from his police years is still there, but it's turned inward now, toward his own network, instead of the state's. His first real test comes when a convoy bringing medicine is stopped outside town by a group of armed men claiming to be protecting the area. The drivers are shaken, the supplies at risk. Naser arrives with 4 men, calm, but unmistakably in control. He doesn't shout, doesn't threaten. He simply stands close enough to be heard when he says, "These aren't yours." Something in his tone settles the matter, and the convoy moves on. That night, over bread and beans with his men, Naser says little, but in his mind, the moment is clear. Srebrenica isn't waiting for permission from Sarajevo or Belgrade anymore. It's looking to those who can act decisively when the road is blocked, and increasingly, that means him. By the time summer edges in, his cellar holds more rifles than wine jars. His nights are filled with planning instead of sleep, and his name is spoken with a new weight in the square. The hills around Srebrenica, have always been good at hiding things. Now, they're hiding the beginnings of something much larger. The circle around him tightens, not in the sense of isolation, but in loyalty. By midsummer, the men who gather in Naser's kitchen or lean over maps in the back of the garage aren't just acquaintances, they're committed. Some are childhood friends, others former hunters or drivers whose livelihoods have shifted with the times. Each brings something to the table: knowledge of a valley, a cousin working in another town, a skill for fixing engines in the dark. Trust is not declared, it's proven. One night, a small shipment of fuel drums vanishes from a shed outside Bratunac. It's a loss they can't afford. Instead of sending a group in force, Naser chooses 2 men and goes himself. They track the drums to a farm halfway to Zvornik, where a nervous young man tries to insist it was a mistake. Naser doesn't raise his voice. He simply gives the man a choice: return the fuel or explain himself to the people who need it. By morning, the drums are back. No one asks how the decision was made. Around the table, he starts assigning quiet roles. One man becomes the eyes in the market, noting which strangers appear and what they buy. Another takes charge of maintaining the vehicles. No breakdown can afford to strand them in these hills. A third coordinates food stores, making sure that in lean weeks, there's enough for the fighters without starving the families. They're not an army. Not yet. But they move with the beginnings of discipline. When Naser calls a meeting, everyone arrives on time. When he says a road is off limits, no one tests it. Even in small things, sharing cigarettes, pouring coffee, there's a subtle deference to his lead. The trust works both ways. Naser makes it clear he won't waste their effort. If he asks a man to take a risk, it's because he's already taken a bigger one himself. He rides the same roads, eats the same food, sleeps in the same cold rooms when they're on watch. That's the kind of leadership mountain men understand. Occasionally, outsiders drift in. Refugees from other towns, drifters looking for protection or a place to belong. Naser is careful with them. Some he turns away politely. Others he lets stay under watch until they've proven themselves. A single wrong man inside the circle could undo everything they've built. One evening, during a planning session over bread and tea, an older hunter leans back and says, "You know, this is starting to look like a unit." Naser doesn't confirm it, but the thought lingers. They may not wear uniforms or salute, but they've formed something with the same backbone, shared purpose, shared risk. The nights grow busier. Small groups slip out into the forests, checking paths, setting hidden markers, building caches where supplies can be stashed unseen. They use no lights, move in silence, and return before dawn. Each successful run strengthens the belief that they can handle whatever's coming. By late summer, people in Srebrenica speak of Naser's men without needing to explain who they are. The phrase carries both reassurance and warning, depending on who's listening. It's not about numbers yet. It's about the sense that, in a time when everything else is uncertain, there's at least one group moving with clear intent. And though no one says it out loud, every man in that circle knows the day will come when clear intent won't be enough. They will need to choose whether they remain shadows in the hills or step into the open as something far more dangerous. Autumn creeps into the Drina Valley with a slow fade, green hills turning bronze, the air sharpening with each dawn. For Naser, the change in season marks another shift. The lessons of the city give way to the lessons of the hills. Urban warfare is different here, but in some ways, even harsher. The narrow streets of Srebrenica can trap you as easily as they can hide you, and the forests, while offering cover, can swallow entire groups without a trace. The first lesson is movement. In Sarajevo, you could blend into a crowd. Here, every passerby is known by name. Disguises are useless. What matters is anticipation. Naser drills his men in knowing the angles of every alley, which paths stay dry after rain, and which rooftops can be crossed without anyone below noticing. They practice quick dispersals. One moment a cluster of men talking on a corner, the next scattered as if they'd never met. The second lesson is economy, not of money, but of ammunition. Rifles are plentiful enough now, but bullets are not. He teaches them to count every shot, to fire only when the target is certain. A bullet you waste today, he says during one evening's instruction, might be the one you need when there's no one left to trade with. He builds discipline through small missions. A supply run to a neighboring village must be completed without a single conversation overheard. A reconnaissance trip into the forest requires each man to return with both a mental map and a physical token from the farthest point reached. Mistakes are not punished harshly, but they are never ignored. It's not only the men who learn. Naser himself absorbs the rhythm of rural conflict. How the enemy isn't always an opposing force in uniform, but sometimes the man who sells you bread in the morning and passes word about you that night. Trust is measured in deeds, not years. One night, under a sliver of moon, a small team accompanies him to a ridge overlooking the main road into town. Below, headlights crawl like fireflies along the bend. They're watching for a convoy rumored to be carrying food and fuel for a rival group. When it passes, the men move in silence to mark the route for a possible interception later. No gunfire, no confrontation, just preparation. The fight, Naser knows, is often won before the first shot is fired. These tactics begin to change the way Srebrenica breathes. Word spreads that his group can appear and vanish at will. Rivals hesitate before moving openly. Traders begin to ask if Naser's men might accompany them on certain trips, not for free, but for goods or information in return. Yet, for all the training and precision, the unpredictability of conflict remains. On a cold evening in late October, a returning patrol reports seeing strangers on the edge of the forest. 3 men carrying something heavy between them. By the time Naser's team arrives, the trail has gone cold. The incident becomes a quiet reminder. Control is never absolute, and the hills can hide more than just your own people. Still, confidence grows. The men move with a subtle pride now, no longer the loose assortment of allies they once were. They are sharper, more deliberate. Each step a part of a larger design. As the leaves fall and the first frost touches the grass, Naser senses that the days of small drills and quiet tests are nearing their end. The skills they've built, stealth, restraint, discipline, will soon be tested against something far less forgiving. By winter's onset, the siege is no longer a distant rumor. It's a living presence, pressing against the edges of Srebrenica, like the cold seeping under every door. Roads that once carried trade are now severed or patrolled by forces who decide, on a whim, whether you pass or vanish. The mountains, once simply home, have become both shield and prison. Naser feels the change most in the way people speak to him. In the early days, they'd greet him with cautious curiosity. Now their eyes carry a plea. They've seen what happens to towns left unprotected, and they're quietly staking their survival on the idea that he can hold this one together. The streets reflect the new reality. Shop shelves grow barer each week, bread lines lengthen, and a bartering system emerges for goods no money can buy. Cigarettes become currency, jars of cooking oil more precious than jewelry. His men adapt quickly, their movements in town blending errands with reconnaissance. Each trip to the market is a chance to listen, to measure the tension in voices, to note who's missing. Outside the town's edges, the hills hum with activity, patrols, scouts, and the occasional echo of distant gunfire. At night, the glow of campfires can be seen on ridgelines, each marking the presence of groups whose loyalties are not always clear. Naser knows that some are rivals, some are allies, and some will be whichever proves more convenient tomorrow. He takes to walking the town at odd hours, sometimes before dawn, sometimes deep into the night. These walks are not for show. They're to feel the pulse of the place, to sense where fear is growing and where morale still holds. In one dimly lit side street, an elderly woman stops him to press a loaf of bread into his hands. "So you remember," she says softly, "we're still here." He does. The siege is not a constant barrage. It's a tightening coil. Some days are quiet enough to almost forget what's coming. Others are tense enough that every door feels like a barricade. Supplies from outside arrive less frequently, and when they do, it's after elaborate routes through forests, rivers, and borderlands. Naser's network becomes the difference between having medicine in the clinic and going without. His men now move in twos or threes, each armed, each carrying a mental map of where they can disappear if needed. They escort traders, check on families in isolated houses, and keep watch over the few remaining storage points in town. One night, a small group intercepts an attempt to siphon fuel from a hidden reserve. They bring the culprits to Naser instead of dealing with them on the spot. He listens, decides the punishment quietly, and makes sure word spreads. Not as a boast, but as a warning. It's in these cold weeks that his reputation hardens. He's no longer seen just as the man with connections or the organizer of armed escorts. To many, he's the line between order and chaos, the one who might keep the siege from swallowing the town whole. That belief is as much a weapon as any rifle, and he knows it must be guarded carefully. The snow begins to fall heavier as the year closes, muffling the sharpness of gunfire in the distance. For the moment, Srebrenica endures, but Naser knows the nature of sieges. They don't just starve the body, they starve patience. And patience, once gone, is a harder thing to replace than bread. The snow lingers well into spring, turning the narrow streets into slush and ice, making every journey slower and more dangerous. By now, survival in Srebrenica is as much about what moves in the shadows as what happens in the open. For Naser, that means keeping the lifelines alive, the black market routes that feed the town when official channels have long since failed. It begins with small trades: a bag of flour for a liter of oil, a carton of cigarettes for a week's worth of bread. But as the siege grinds on, the stakes rise. Soon it's crates of antibiotics swapped for ammunition, or radios traded for fuel. Everything has value. Nothing is left idle. The network is fragile. One broken link, one careless word, and a supply line can vanish overnight. Naser keeps it steady by spreading risk. No single man knows every step of a route, and no cache is ever left in the same place for long. The forest paths become arteries of survival, each bend and hollow memorized by those who walk them. The exchanges are not always friendly. On a damp evening, Naser meets with a contact from outside the enclave, a man whose allegiance is as fluid as the rivers he crosses. The goods are laid out on a tarp under a makeshift shelter. Tins of meat, batteries, bandages. Payment is in the form of a bag that clinks when it moves. Before they part, the man says, "Next time, the price will be higher." Naser doesn't argue. He knows in war, prices only ever go one way. Back in town, the black market keeps more than just bellies full. It keeps morale from collapsing. A child with a piece of candy smiles for the first time in weeks. A father finds enough fuel to keep his family warm through a cold night. These are small victories, but in a siege, small victories are everything. Yet, there's danger in dependence. The more the town leans on these underground trades, the more vulnerable it becomes to anyone who controls them. Naser walks a careful line, making sure no single supplier holds all the cards. Sometimes this means playing rivals against each other. Other times it means taking a risk to bring in goods directly, bypassing the middlemen altogether. The men in his circle adapt to the rhythm of this hidden economy. They learn to carry goods in ways that don't attract notice, to use code words in casual conversation, to slip into and out of meeting spots without being remembered. A load of rice might arrive hidden under a pile of scrap metal. Rifles might be wrapped in cloth and passed off as firewood. Not every run ends cleanly. One night, a team returns without the medicine they were sent for, stopped by an armed group on the road who demanded half the shipment as tax. The loss stings, but Naser reminds them that surviving to make another trip is worth more than dying over one. He knows the fight over supplies isn't just about goods. It's about staying in the game long enough to outlast those who take from you. By the time spring sunlight starts to break through the clouds, the black market in Srebrenica is not just a survival mechanism, it's the town's heartbeat. And as long as that heartbeat continues, so does the belief that they can endure whatever the siege throws at them next. The hills above Srebrenica are never truly still, even in peacetime. Now, under siege, they've become a shifting web of movement. Paths known only to those who walk them at night. Routes that twist through forests and rocky gullies to places no map bothers to mark. These are the smuggling arteries, and Naser is intent on knowing every inch of them. It's not just about the goods. It's about the certainty that when one route closes, another can be opened before anyone notices the loss. He moves with small teams, rarely more than 4 men, traveling light, always ready to vanish into the trees at the first sign of trouble. The smell of damp earth and pine needles clings to their clothes. The quiet crunch of boots on frost is the only sound. They use landmarks no outsider would think twice about. A split rock shaped like a wolf's head, a fallen tree pointing toward the Drina, a stream that disappears underground before surfacing again miles away. These markers are burned into memory because paper maps can be lost, and radios can betray you if the wrong ears are listening. The crossings are not just through Bosnian territory. Some paths slip briefly over the border into Serbia, where the risks multiply. There are patrols to avoid, rival groups with their own claims on the land, and the ever-present chance that someone will sell your position for a few liters of fuel. But sometimes the most valuable supplies lie on the other side, and risk is the only toll you can pay. On one winter night, Naser leads a run toward a hidden drop point marked by a tangle of rusted barbed wire in the trees. The cargo is light, antibiotics and water filters, but priceless in the enclave. They move silently, speaking only in short, low phrases, their breath clouding in the air. At the handoff, the supplier gives him a quick nod, no words exchanged. and disappears back into the dark. Deals like this don't require conversation. Just trust that each side will be where they're supposed to, when they're supposed to. Back in Srebrenica, the goods vanish into hidden caches almost as quickly as they arrive. Some are buried under wood piles, others hidden in hollowed-out walls. The fewer people who know, the safer it is. His men understand that secrecy is worth more than speed. Not all routes succeed. One attempt to bring in grain ends in retreat when a rival group blocks the pass. No shots are fired, but the message is clear. These hills are claimed by more than one shadow. Naser files it away, knowing that the fight for supply lines will only grow sharper as the siege tightens. The locals, even those not in his circle, know these smuggling paths exist, though they never ask for details. It's enough to know that somewhere in the forest, men are walking through the cold so that bread will appear on a table tomorrow. That unspoken understanding is part of what holds the town together. In this new reality, the smuggling routes aren't just a means of survival. They're the veins of Srebrenica's resistance. And as long as they keep flowing, there's still a pulse to fight for. The first raid happens in the dead of night, when even the market dogs are quiet. Naser chooses the hour carefully, late enough that fatigue dulls the senses, early enough that the cold hasn't yet numbed his men's fingers. They move in small groups, using the alleys and shadows they've memorized from weeks of observation. The target is not a grand prize, just a storehouse recently taken over by a group that's been squeezing local traders. But in a siege, every sack of flour is worth the risk. His men slip through a side door left poorly secured. Inside, the air smells of dust, oil, and the faint tang of dried fruit. They work in silence, lifting crates and sacks into waiting carts. Each man knows his role. No one speaks above a whisper. It's not the kind of raid that makes for dramatic retelling. No shots fired, no alarms, but that's the point. The fewer stories told, the less chance the wrong ears hear them. By dawn, the goods are hidden in 3 separate caches. One under loose floorboards in a derelict house, one buried beneath a stack of firewood, and one sealed inside a false wall in the garage. From there, they'll be distributed slowly, so no one notices a sudden abundance. The victory is quiet, but it's the kind that keeps people fed for weeks. The second raid is less smooth. A tip-off sends them after a shipment of cooking oil being guarded in a farmhouse outside town. This time, a sentry spots movement in the dark. A brief exchange of gunfire snaps the air, sending birds shrieking into the sky. No one is hit, but the noise forces them to retreat with only half the intended haul. Back in Srebrenica, Naser doesn't scold. He uses the failure to drive the point home. Speed and silence are worth more than firepower when the goal is to keep operating tomorrow. Word of the raids spreads in whispers. To supporters, they're proof that Naser's men can reach into enemy-held territory and come back with something to show for it. To rivals, they're a warning. Supplies are never truly secure unless you can protect them every hour of every day. But raids aren't just about goods. They're about pressure. Each one forces the opposition to divert resources, to guard places they thought were safe, to question their own security. And in a siege, sowing doubt can be as valuable as stealing food. Still, Naser is careful not to overuse the tactic. Every operation carries risk, and too many in quick succession would bring unwanted attention. Between raids, his men melt back into their daily roles: drivers, traders, mechanics, keeping the appearance of ordinary life as intact as possible. One cold evening, as they share bread and strong tea after another quiet success. One of the younger men asks, "How long do we keep doing this?" Naser looks at him for a long moment before answering. "As long as they think they can starve us out." The room falls silent. Everyone knows it's not just about the food. It's about showing that they can't be starved of will either. In this way, each midnight raid becomes more than an act of survival. It's a message written in silence and shadows. Srebrenica is not going quietly. By early spring, the town is no longer just surviving. It's adapting. Every shop, cafe, and back room feels like part of a hidden network, each playing a role in the quiet logistics of endurance. Naser understands that guns and supplies keep you alive, but alliances decide whether you hold your ground. That's where the political players come in. The local politicians are not the distant, clean-handed figures of peacetime. Here, power is often measured in who can arrange a convoy, secure a medical shipment, or convince a checkpoint to wave someone through. They hold influence, but it's fragile, dependent on a web of favors and the goodwill of those with actual reach in the streets. Naser doesn't storm into this world. He steps into it like a man entering cold water, slowly and with care. He attends small gatherings in candlelit rooms, sits in the corners of meetings that blend strategy with supper. He listens more than he speaks, letting others reveal their ambitions in the way they phrase their offers. One evening, over plates of bean stew, a local councilman leans across the table. "Your men can move where we can't," he says, voice low. "We can open doors you can't." It's not exactly a proposal, more a statement of mutual necessity. Naser nods, but gives no promises on the spot. He knows every alliance comes with strings, and strings in wartime can turn into chains. Still, opportunities grow from these quiet talks. A warehouse once locked tight to his men suddenly opens under the guise of civilian aid distribution. A stalled shipment of winter coats gets waved past a checkpoint after a conversation in a back office. Each success reinforces the value of staying in the room when decisions are made. It's not all smooth. Some politicians view him as a useful tool. Others see him as a rival power that could eclipse their own. In a place where every decision is weighed against personal survival, mistrust is the default currency. Naser answers it with consistency. When he says he'll deliver, he does, and when he warns of trouble, it arrives exactly as he predicted. His circle begins to mirror this dual nature of street and council. One man handles the paperwork when it's needed: permits, ration cards, passes for travel. Another quietly updates Naser on who met with whom in the municipal building. It's a blend of diplomacy and pressure, the same way he once balanced the badge in the back room in Sarajevo. There's a moment during a late-night strategy session when one council member half-jokingly calls him our unofficial commander. The remark draws a few laughs, but no one disputes it. Titles don't mean much here anymore, results do. By the end of spring, Naser has built a bridge between two worlds that rarely trust each other: the armed men in the hills and the officials in the offices. It's a fragile span, but for now, it holds. And as long as it holds, Srebrenica has both a voice in the council room and a presence in the shadows. With influence in the council rooms and respect in the streets, the weight of command settles fully on Naser's shoulders. It's not the kind of command marked by medals or parades, but by the quiet, unrelenting pressure of knowing that every decision can ripple through the entire town. Who eats, who goes without, who risks their life on the road tomorrow. It all funnels back to him. The hardest part isn't moving goods or negotiating routes. It's the choices where no answer feels right. A doctor needs a shipment of antibiotics for the clinic, but delivering them means pulling guards from the eastern approaches for a night. A trader offers a truckload of fuel, but only if it's used for his own properties first. Every option comes with a cost, and Naser has to weigh which price is worth paying. His men feel the strain too. They follow his orders without question, but he can see the toll in the way they smoke more, sleep less, glance toward the hills as if expecting trouble to crest them at any moment. In small ways, he works to keep them steady. A hot meal after a long patrol, a quiet word with someone who's been on edge, a reminder that they're still standing when others have fallen. In meetings, both with his circle and with the political players, he's careful with his tone, too forceful, and he risks alienating allies. Too cautious, and he invites challenges. He learns to guide rather than demand, to let others believe they've arrived at his conclusion on their own. The moments of decision often come without warning. One night, word arrives that a convoy carrying flour and medicine is stalled on a road near Bratunac, blocked by an armed group demanding half the load as toll. The council debates endlessly. Naser listens for a while, then stands. If it's still there by dawn, it's gone, he says, and leaves. His men are ready before the council even finishes their argument. By sunrise, the convoy is in Srebrenica, the goods intact. No one asks how the blockade was cleared, but the message is clear. Hesitation loses more than it saves. He also knows that command isn't just about reacting. It's about anticipating. He begins keeping a ledger, not of money, but of favors, promises, and warnings. Who owes him? Who he owes? Who can be counted on when the lines cut too close? It's not written in any official book, but it's the most valuable record in town. There are nights when the weight feels heavier than he'll admit. Sitting alone with a cigarette, he thinks about the boy who once roamed Srebrenica's market, watching the subtle language of trade. That boy wanted to be where things happened. Now, he's the one who decides what happens. It's a privilege, but also a trap. There's no stepping back without leaving someone else to bear the consequences. Still, the people need that steadiness, that sense that someone is watching all the moving parts. And as long as Naser can keep the balance between force and foresight, between action and restraint, the fragile order in Srebrenica will hold, at least for now. The calls from Sarajevo start as rare interruptions, static-laced voices on battered radios, requesting updates, offering fragments of information from the outside. Over time, they become a steady thread, weaving Srebrenica into a larger, chaotic network of towns trying to survive their own sieges. For Naser, these connections are both opportunity and risk. Travel to the capital is dangerous, but sometimes necessary. The first trip begins before dawn, his convoy moving under a sky still black enough to hide them. The roads between here and Sarajevo are littered with half-burned vehicles and the husks of old roadblocks. Every bend holds the possibility of an ambush, but also the promise of passing unseen if the timing is right. When they finally reach the city, it's a shock. Sarajevo is both familiar and utterly changed. The trams stand motionless on their tracks, shop windows are boarded up, and the air is a mix of wood smoke and cordite. Naser keeps his time in the open short, moving quickly to the addresses given in advance. The meetings are unlike the casual backroom talks of his earlier days here. Now, the rooms are dim, the chairs mismatched, and the discussions clipped. Some of the people at the table are politicians, others businessmen, and a few are faces he remembers from the edges of Sarajevo's underworld. In this new reality, the lines between them have blurred. The capital's networks offer what Srebrenica can't produce: larger caches of ammunition, access to foreign-supplied aid before it's filtered through too many hands, and information about the shifting front lines. In return, Naser's roots and men provide a way to move goods where official convoys can't or won't go. Trust is thin. More than once, a promised shipment fails to materialize, replaced instead with excuses about sudden raids or miscommunications. Naser learns to treat every agreement as provisional until the goods are in his hands. Still, the benefits are too great to ignore. Even a fraction of what's promised can mean the difference between scarcity and collapse back in Srebrenica. On one trip, he sits across from an old acquaintance from his police days, now working in a role that's part intelligence, part logistics. Over thick coffee, the man says, "The capital can't hold forever without the towns, and the towns can't hold without the capital. Whether we like it or not, we're bound together." It's the closest thing to a reassurance Naser gets in these dealings. The return journeys are just as tense as the arrivals. They move at night, headlights off, trusting the drivers to know every curve by memory. The cargo, sometimes medicine, sometimes weapons, sometimes just sacks of flour, is hidden under layers of scrap or bundled in tarps that could pass for farm tools. Back in Srebrenica, these deliveries are never announced. Goods are dispersed quietly, a few here, a few there, each to where they'll do the most good without drawing the wrong kind of attention. The council knows some of it comes from Sarajevo. They don't ask for details. These connections to the capital add a new layer to Naser's role. He's no longer just the man holding Srebrenica together from within. He's part of a web stretching across the fractured country. And in a war where isolation can kill faster than bullets, that web might be the only thing keeping the town alive. By the summer, Srebrenica's survival depends not only on the supplies coming in, but on the uneasy balance between its own factions. Naser knows he isn't the only man with influence in the hills. Other commanders, some from nearby villages, have built their own followings. They share the same enemies, but that doesn't make them allies. The first meeting with a rival warlord takes place in a clearing at the edge of the forest, chosen so neither side feels cornered. The air smells of pine and the faint smoke of distant cooking fires. Both groups arrive on time, weapons visible, but not raised. The man opposite Naser is older, broader, with a voice like gravel, and a reputation for unpredictable violence. They speak in the measured language of men who have much to gain from cooperation, but even more to lose from mistrust. They talk about convoy routes, about who controls which roads, about keeping traders safe from raids. At least the raids neither of them order. Nothing is written down, but the agreements are clear enough. Respect certain boundaries, and both sides eat. Not all encounters are this civil. In another meeting, held in the dim back room of a half-ruined cafe, a different rival makes no effort to hide his disdain. He accuses Naser of taking more than his share, of controlling the council through intimidation. Naser doesn't rise to the bait. He simply states the numbers, how many supply runs his men have made, how much has gone to the civilian population, and leaves the accusations unanswered. Sometimes, silence is its own weapon. The challenge is constant, balancing the need for cooperation with the need to protect his own position. Too much compromise, and he risks being seen as weak. Too much force, and he risks open conflict with men whose resources he may need tomorrow. Among his own circle, he stresses the importance of intelligence. Every encounter with another commander is followed by quiet debriefs: who they brought with them, what weapons they carried, which of their men did the talking. Small details can be the difference between being prepared for a shift in loyalty and being caught off guard. One evening, while sharing tea in the market square, a trader leans close and says, "Be careful. Some of these men smile at you while counting the days until you make a mistake." Naser doesn't need the warning. He's seen enough of that in Sarajevo. But he appreciates the reminder. Despite the tension, the rivalries have a strange benefit. They force constant movement, constant planning. Stagnation in war is death, and as long as each side is watching the other, no one grows complacent. By the end of the season, the lines between ally and adversary are as thin as the trails through the forest. Agreements hold for now, but everyone knows they're written in sand, waiting for the next strong wind to erase them. And Naser, as always, keeps his boots ready to walk whichever path survival demands. The first time Naser crosses an international border during the war, it's not for escape, it's for opportunity. Word has reached him of a possible arms deal just over the Drina, in territory crawling with shifting loyalties. The trip is risky. One wrong turn could put them in the hands of a group that would happily trade their lives for supplies. Still, the potential payoff, light machine guns, ammunition belts, and spare parts for the rifles already in Srebrenica, makes it worth the gamble. They move at night in a pair of battered trucks, their cargo bays empty for the journey out. The border itself is less a line and more a zone of uncertainty, marked by rusted signs and the skeletal remains of an old customs post. Official checkpoints are easy enough to avoid. The real threat is from roving bands who claim to control the area for whichever side suits them at the moment. Naser's contact is a man called Luka, an ethnic Serb whose reputation is built on his ability to do business with anyone who pays. They meet in an abandoned warehouse, lit by a single hanging bulb, the air thick with the smell of oil and damp concrete. Luka greets him warmly, but the warmth is purely transactional. The goods are laid out in neat rows on a tarp. 2 PKM machine guns, a dozen AK-47s, crates of ammunition, and a scattering of hand grenades. It's not a vast arsenal, but in a place where even one rifle can change the balance of a street fight, it's a treasure. Luka names his price, and Naser doesn't flinch. Payment is made in a mix of cash and trade goods, medicine, batteries, and a small stash of high-quality cigarettes that fetch more than gold in wartime. The return trip is tense. They use different routes, winding through logging trails and shallow river crossings. Twice, they stop to let other convoys pass, one carrying timber, the other clearly transporting weapons for a different buyer. The drivers say little, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. Back in Srebrenica, the new weapons are quietly distributed among his most trusted fighters. Each man is told exactly where his weapon came from and exactly how few there are to go around. Scarcity sharpens discipline. No one dares waste a bullet, knowing how far it traveled to reach them. Cross-border runs become an occasional but vital part of their operations. Sometimes it's arms, other times fuel, spare vehicle parts, or canned food bought from traders who care more about profit than politics. Each journey carries the same dangers, and each one reminds Naser that survival often depends on dealing with people who, under different circumstances, would be on the other side of a rifle. The trips also carry another value: information. Every border crossing is a chance to hear rumors from outside the enclave: which towns have fallen, where fighting is heaviest, which routes are still open. It's a patchwork picture of the wider war, but in a place as isolated as Srebrenica, even scraps of news are precious. By the end of autumn, the map in Naser's head stretches beyond the mountains of eastern Bosnia. The war may be local in its battles, but its lifelines run across borders, through backrooms, and into the hands of anyone willing to pay the price. And Naser, more than most, understands that in war, sometimes your next meal and your next bullet come from the same handshake. The first time his name appears in an international newspaper, Naser doesn't see it himself. The clipping is handed to him by a man from Sarajevo, folded neatly, the ink smudged from travel. The headline calls him a symbol of Srebrenica's defiance, though the article itself is a strange blend of truth, rumor, and political spin. Some details are accurate: the sieges, the convoys, the network of men moving through the hills. Others are inventions, tales of daring rescues that never happened, accusations of ruthless reprisals that no one in town can confirm or deny. In a war where perception is as powerful as weaponry, media attention is a double-edged blade. On one hand, it draws sympathy, and with it, potential support from abroad. On the other, it paints a target on his back. For every foreign journalist who describes him as a protector, there's another who frames him as a dangerous warlord. Foreign reporters begin appearing in the enclave, escorted by aid workers, or slipping in through the same mountain routes used for supplies. They come with cameras, notebooks, and an air of cautious curiosity. Naser doesn't seek them out, but he doesn't avoid them either. When he does speak, his answers are measured, enough to convey the reality of the siege without revealing the mechanics that keep it going. One visit stands out. A British correspondent, young but sharp-eyed, asks to walk with him through the market. As they move past stalls with little more than onions and stale bread for sale, she asks, "Do you see yourself as a soldier or a mayor?" Naser smiles faintly. "Here, there's no difference. You keep people alive, whichever title they give you." Not all media encounters are so neutral. A television crew from abroad arrives unannounced, broadcasting images of his men unloading supplies from a truck. Within a week, a rival group blocks one of his routes, claiming the footage proved he was hoarding goods. It's a reminder that visibility can be as dangerous as any ambush. Inside Srebrenica, the attention fuels both pride and unease. Some residents see him as the town's voice to the outside world, someone who can make their plight impossible to ignore. Others whisper that the cameras bring trouble, that being a symbol invites the kind of scrutiny they can't afford. In his quieter moments, Naser reflects on how the image of a man can take on a life of its own. In Sarajevo, he was a policeman with a foot in two worlds. Here, he's become something that newspapers and broadcasts reshape for their own ends. The truth is simpler and harder. Every day is about making sure the town is still standing tomorrow. Yet he knows better than to dismiss the power of narrative. If being seen as a symbol draws in aid, keeps Srebrenica on the map of foreign concern, then it's a tool, one to use carefully before it turns against him. In a war like this, survival isn't just about holding ground. It's about controlling the story told about the ground you hold. The guns fall silent one morning, not from peace, but from exhaustion. No shelling, no scattered gunfire in the hills, just an uneasy stillness that feels as fragile as glass. For the first time in months, the sound of a hammer striking wood in the marketplace carries farther than 100 meters. But Naser knows better than to mistake quiet for safety. The war beyond Srebrenica's borders is shifting. Rumors drift in from Sarajevo and Tuzla, negotiations in distant rooms, new ceasefire lines drawn and redrawn. None of it is official, but all of it is enough to make men start thinking about what comes after. For Naser, the thought is both relief and a new kind of problem. Fighting is straightforward. Peace is murkier. In war, everyone knows the rules. Protect your own, hold your ground, keep the supply lines open. In peace, the questions multiply. Who controls the roads? Who owns the warehouses? Who decides which debts are still valid and which are forgotten? The answers will shape the new order, and if he doesn't have a say in them, others will. Some of his men talk about laying down their weapons, going back to their old trades. A few even do. Drivers return to their trucks. Shopkeepers reopen shutters long closed. But others are wary. They know that in Bosnia's fractured landscape, post-war can be a pause, not an ending. Naser starts moving more carefully in this uncertain time. He maintains the network, but with quieter hands, less visible patrols, more discreet meetings. He sits in on council sessions that are suddenly crowded with voices eager to claim credit for survival. Some praise his role. Others subtly push for him to step back, fearing his influence in a peacetime hierarchy. The black market doesn't vanish, it adapts. With fewer blockades, goods start to flow more freely, but the routes, contacts, and leverage Naser built still matter. Where before they moved crates of ammunition, now they move sacks of cement, spools of wire, and tin roofing. Reconstruction becomes the new currency, and those who control the materials control the pace of recovery. He's also approached by people from outside the enclave, traders from Sarajevo, businessmen from Tuzla, even a pair of foreigners looking for investment opportunities. Their smiles are smooth, but Naser reads the hunger in their eyes. Peace or not, they want in on what he controls. One evening, while sitting on a bench overlooking the town, an old woman stops beside him. She tells him that in the early days of the siege, she prayed for someone to take charge, someone who could keep them alive. Now she prays he won't be pushed aside by those who hid during the worst of it. Her words stay with him long after she walks away. Peace, Naser realizes, will test him in ways the siege never could. The enemy in war is obvious. In peace, the enemy can be a handshake, a smile, a quiet deal made in a room where he isn't invited. And so, even as the gunfire fades, he keeps his boots ready, his routes memorized, and his circle close. Because in Bosnia, the end of one fight is usually the start of another. The first real business to take root after the fighting isn't a shop or a cafe. It's a construction yard. Piles of gravel, stacks of brick, lengths of rebar tied in bundles. Naser watches it grow from the shell of an old warehouse, knowing exactly what it means. In post-war Bosnia, rebuilding isn't just about shelter. It's about power. Whoever controls the materials controls the contracts, the schedules, and in a way, the lives of those waiting for their homes to stand again. He doesn't announce himself as the owner, but his hand is in it from the start. Trucks that once carried food and medicine now haul timber and cement. The same drivers who slipped past checkpoints now bring shipments through customs offices that still smell of fresh paint. Even the routes haven't changed much, just the cargo. At first, the profits are modest. People are still counting their coins, deciding whether to fix a roof or simply patch it for another winter. But as aid money begins to trickle in from abroad, orders grow. Schools, clinics, government buildings, everyone wants their projects finished before someone else's. And behind every delivery, there's a handshake with Naser or one of his men. It isn't all smooth. Rivals appear quickly, some former fighters, others businessmen who sat out the war and now see an opening. One offers to partner with Naser, which is just a polite way of asking for control. Another tries to poach one of his best suppliers, sparking a brief standoff in a half-rebuilt cafe that ends without violence but leaves the message clear. He won't be muscled out. The work also opens doors into the urban economy. With building projects in motion, he quietly acquires a share in a small transport company, giving him access to vehicles that can operate in cities without drawing suspicion. A few months later, he invests in a string of market stalls, officially selling hardware and tools, unofficially serving as a meeting point for his wider network. Not all of his men take to the business side easily. Some chafe at the slower pace, the lack of adrenaline. Others, though, thrive, negotiating deals, keeping track of deliveries, learning that profit margins can be as satisfying as any battlefield win. In the evenings, Naser walks the streets and sees buildings rising where rubble once lay. The sound of hammers and saws is constant, a different kind of noise than the wars. But beneath it, the old instincts stay sharp. Every shipment that leaves the yard is noted. Every payment is tracked. Peace may be the season for building, but control is still built the same way it always was, piece by piece, deal by deal, until you own more than anyone realizes. By the time autumn returns, his reach has spread quietly through both the physical and economic landscapes of Srebrenica. To outsiders, it looks like progress. To those who know better, it's something else entirely. The foundation of a different kind of fortress, one made of contracts, supply chains, and obligations that no bullet can tear down. The summons to court arrives in a plain envelope, the kind used for tax notices or forgotten utility bills. Inside is a printed order with his name in bold and the emblem of an international tribunal stamped across the top. The charges, laid out in careful legal language, speak of alleged war crimes and command responsibility. Naser reads it twice, the words cold and heavy, though not unexpected. The summons is the culmination of years of whispers. For some, he's a defender who kept Srebrenica breathing when the world looked away. For others, he's a commander whose decisions in the fog of war demand answers. The truth is messier than either side wants to admit, and Naser knows that courtrooms aren't always places where the whole truth is welcome. The news spreads quickly. In the market, some avoid his gaze. Others grip his hand firmly, muttering that they know what really happened. His men react with a quiet readiness, not because they expect violence, but because they understand that his absence will shift the balance of power in ways no one can fully predict. The journey to the hearing feels different from his wartime trips. No armed escorts, no clandestine routes. Just an official car, the hum of the road, and the knowledge that every movement is being observed. Reporters gather outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing in the pale morning light. Naser keeps his eyes forward, giving them nothing more than a brief nod. Inside, the proceedings move at the slow, deliberate pace of legal machinery. Prosecutors outline their case with dates, locations, and testimonies from people he remembers in fragments. Some details are accurate, others are twisted by memory or perspective. When it's his turn to speak, he keeps his words measured, careful not to let anger edge into his voice. Days stretch into weeks. Witnesses appear and disappear, some offering support, others condemnation. Outside the building, protests form, small groups holding signs that either hail him as a hero or call for his conviction. He avoids them all, focusing instead on the faces inside the courtroom that matter: the judges, the lawyers, and the few old allies who make the trip to sit quietly in the back row. The verdict doesn't come quickly. International trials are marathons, not sprints, and he knows he'll be living under its shadow for months, perhaps years. In the meantime, he returns to Srebrenica under strict conditions, the town holding its breath to see what will come next. For Naser, the trial isn't just about his past. It's about the shape of his future. If he walks free, the legitimacy it grants him will be undeniable. If he doesn't, others will carve up what he's built before the gavel even falls. Either way, the courtroom has become another battlefield, one where the weapons are words and the terrain is memory. And just like in the hills, he knows that survival here depends on understanding the rules before anyone else does. Freedom after the first round of hearings feels strange, like stepping back into a house where the furniture's been moved. Naser walks through Srebrenica with the same stride as before, but the air around him has shifted. Old allies greet him warmly, but with questions in their eyes. Rivals, sensing uncertainty, test the edges of his influence. The war is over, but the war over memory has just begun. Former comrades stop by his home, some to reassure him, others to gauge his mood. Over strong coffee, they speak of debts unpaid and favors remembered, as if reminding him that loyalty has its own statute of limitations. A few hint at opportunities: land deals, transport contracts, even positions in local politics, if he's willing to step back into certain roles. But the old network is frayed. Years have passed since the siege, and the men who once answered his calls without hesitation now have families, businesses, and other allegiances. Some still stand ready. Others have quietly aligned themselves with new patrons. Naser doesn't press. He listens, watches, and makes mental notes of who still leans in when he speaks. One evening, he attends a gathering in a repurposed cafe, its walls still marked by shrapnel scars beneath fresh paint. The room is full of familiar faces: traders, contractors, former council members. Conversation flows easily until someone brings up the tribunal again. The tone shifts, subtle but undeniable. Everyone wants to know what the judges will decide, but no one wants to be seen betting on the wrong outcome. Outside, in the cool night air, an old driver from his wartime convoys takes him aside. "There are people waiting for you to make a mistake," the man says quietly. "They think if you stumble now, you won't get back up." Naser nods, filing it away. He's heard the same advice in different words since Sarajevo. Old debts surface too, some in the form of favors owed to him, others he still carries. A widow whose husband died on one of his supply runs comes to his door, asking for help with her son's schooling. A former political contact calls, needing quiet assistance in settling a dispute over property. These aren't transactions. They're reminders that his reach has always been built on more than force. Still, there's caution in his moves. The tribunal's shadow means every step is weighed for how it will be interpreted, both in court and in the court of public opinion. Even a simple visit to a construction site is planned, so it doesn't look like he's reclaiming control too aggressively. In private, he rebuilds the old channels. He meets with the men who still command respect in the villages, revives connections in the transport trade, and keeps a careful watch on the shifting alliances in town hall. His approach is slower now, less about sudden shows of strength and more about proving he can still make things happen quietly, efficiently. The siege may have ended years ago, but Naser knows the pattern well. Control in this place is never given, only taken, and then held piece by piece, until no one remembers when it wasn't yours. Politics comes to him not as an invitation, but as a suggestion whispered often enough to feel inevitable. "You should run," a councilman says over coffee one morning. "The town needs someone who's proven they can lead." Naser doesn't answer right away. In Bosnia, stepping into politics means stepping into a maze where every corridor is watched, and every hand extended might also hold a knife. Still, the idea lingers. The local elections are approaching, and the field is thin. Career bureaucrats with little connection to the siege years, a few wealthy businessmen eager to turn influence into official authority. For the older residents, these names mean little. They remember who stood when the town was most exposed. The first meetings are informal. Private rooms in cafes, late-night conversations in half-renovated offices. Some want him to run as an independent, others under the banner of a party looking to expand its reach in the region. Each option comes with promises of funding, logistical support, and media assistance, but also with the expectation of loyalty. Naser knows his appeal isn't in polished speeches or party slogans. It's in the stories people still tell. The convoy that made it through. The supplies that arrived just in time. The nights when the sound of his men's boots in the street meant trouble would be handled. Those memories are currency, but they're also fragile. Too much exposure and they can be rewritten or questioned. His closest advisors, men from the old circle, plus a few newer allies from the business side, urge caution. Politics will pull you into fights you can't win with a straight answer, one warns. And once you're in, they'll measure every decision against both your past and their expectations. Despite the risks, the groundwork begins. Supporters quietly line up, testing public sentiment in markets, at football matches, during weddings and funerals where politics always finds a way into the conversation. The responses are mixed, but lean in his favor. Rivals notice the shift. A former wartime competitor, now aligned with a regional party, begins speaking more loudly about accountability and turning the page on old leadership. Another hints that tribunal matters should be settled before anyone from that era seeks office. Naser doesn't respond publicly, but his silence isn't weakness, it's patience. By the time autumn rolls around, he hasn't declared his candidacy, but the town is already talking as if it's certain. Posters from other campaigns appear on walls and lampposts. None with his face, yet his name comes up in every debate. In the quiet of his home, Naser considers the move carefully. Politics is another battlefield, one fought in words, votes, and alliances instead of rifles and raids. And while the weapons are different, the stakes are the same. Control of what happens next. If he steps in, it won't be to play the game as others do. It will be to bend it, to use the patience and leverage that have kept him standing through worse storms than any council meeting could bring. The decision to reappear in public life comes quietly. No speeches, no grand announcements, just a presence. Naser begins attending town meetings, sitting near the back at first, listening more than speaking. He walks through the market more often, pausing to ask stallholders about their families, their prices, their worries. People notice. In Bosnia, showing up is its own kind of campaign. He also starts funding small projects, repairs to a school roof, supplies for the local clinic, a water pump for a village on the outskirts. None of them carry his name in bold letters, but everyone knows who made them happen. It's an old wartime habit. Deliver results quietly, Let the gratitude speak louder than the act. Still, the whispers persist. Some say he's buying influence, others that he's positioning himself as the protector again. A local radio station hosts a debate where one guest questions whether a man with an unfinished tribunal case should hold any official post. Another counters that no one else has matched his record of getting things done. His rivals try subtle moves to box him out. A construction tender he's backed is delayed without explanation. A road repair project is reassigned to a company tied to a sitting council member. None of these are crippling blows, but each is meant to remind him that the political field plays by different rules. Naser adapts. Instead of pushing for large, visible wins, he focuses on building a coalition. Former fighters, business owners, younger men and women who grew up during the siege, and now want stability above all. They meet in small groups, away from the main streets, sharing coffee, and quietly mapping out who can be relied on when the votes are counted. He also reopens certain channels from the old days. A friendly phone call to a contact in Tuzla secures a shipment of school supplies before winter. A conversation with a former rival clears the way for a disputed piece of land to be used as a community garden. Each action reminds people that his reach still extends beyond the town limits. By late winter, his position is stronger than many expected. He's not declared for any office, but when journalists visit, they find that locals already speak about him as if he's part of the leadership. That perception, more than any official title, gives him leverage. One evening, after a meeting with a group of market traders, a young man approaches him on the street. "You don't need to be in office," the man says. "You already run half the things that matter." Naser smiles but doesn't answer. He's learned that in politics, as in war, the most powerful position is sometimes the one you don't claim out loud. Spring brings a restlessness to Srebrenica. The snow melts into the streets, revealing cracks in the pavement and in the town's fragile peace. Naser moves through it all with the same steady gait he's carried since the siege, though the weight on his shoulders is different now. The gunfire has faded into memory, but the responsibilities haven't. His days are a balance between public appearances and quiet dealings. In the morning, he might walk the market, greeting vendors as if the years between now and the war were just a pause. By afternoon, he's in the back room of a cafe, meeting with a contractor about a road repair project that also happens to strengthen a transport route he's quietly maintaining. The council elections come and go without his name on the ballot. Yet, when the new members take their seats, more than half are people he's helped in some way, through a business introduction, a supply run years ago, or a favor repaid recently. He doesn't need the title. The influence is already his. Some evenings, he takes the long way home, walking the outskirts where the hills slope down toward the river. The paths are quieter now, but in his mind, he can still trace every smuggler's route, every cache hidden in the forest. Those trails were once lifelines. Now they're memories, though he keeps them sharp, just in case. The younger generation approaches him differently. For them, the siege is a story their parents told, not a life they lived. Some see him as a relic, others as a figure worth learning from. He doesn't push either view. If they ask questions, he answers. If they want advice, he gives it. But he's careful not to turn his past into a monument. In Bosnia, monuments are often targets. In the quiet hours, he reflects on what's lasted. The war shaped him, but it didn't define every corner of his life. The networks he built for survival have become the channels through which the town rebuilds. The trust he earned in fire has outlasted the smoke, And while peace is a messier battlefield, it's one he can navigate because he knows where the traps are. Legacy is a word others use. For Naser, it's simpler. Make sure the people who relied on him then can still rely on him now. Whether they call him a hero, a warlord, or just a man who kept things moving, the truth is that Srebrenica is still here, and so is he. The streets quiet as night settles in. Somewhere, a radio hums softly in a shop window. He pauses to listen, then turns toward home. Tomorrow will bring its own negotiations, its own tests. But tonight, the town sleeps, and for now, that's enough. So here we are, at the end of Naser Orić's journey, through hills and city streets, through the siege's shadows and the uneasy light of what came after. The noise of those years may have faded, but their imprint remains, in the walls rebuilt, in the market stalls still trading, in the quiet routes that once carried life into a place the world thought lost. Picture the streets now. They're calm, lit by the soft amber of aging street lamps. The market is closed, the last voices fading into the night. Somewhere in the hills, the wind threads through the pines, carrying no scent of smoke, no echo of gunfire, just the clean, cold air of a spring night in the Drina Valley. It's easy to imagine him walking home, the weight of the day settling into his steps, the years of decisions, hard ones, costly ones, folding into the stillness. In the dark, there's no applause, no judgment, just the knowledge that for better or worse, he shaped a piece of this place, and it shaped him in return. You can feel that same stillness if you let yourself. Let your shoulders drop, your breath slow. Hear the soft hum of whatever fills your own quiet space. A fan, a street outside your window, the faint buzz of an old lamp. The world beyond it will keep turning. The work, the noise, the arguments, they'll wait until morning. For now, there's only this moment, so rest. Let the story settle in your mind like the last embers of a fire, fading to a gentle glow. Tomorrow has its own battles, but tonight, the hills are calm, the streets are safe, and you can close your eyes knowing you've made it through another day.